So welcome everybody to our Friday Cooperative Extension Ask the Extension Expert. This is our webinar series put on by the College of the Environmental Sciences and University of Rhode Island Cooperative Extension. Today we're excited to bring you three of our faculty and staff members here at the University of Rhode Island who are experts in growing food. And we will go through kind of introductions about them, but basically the overview of what we're going to do today is the first half of today will be all about learning some of answers to our frequently asked questions that we get on our gardening and environmental hotline. And then the second half will be open to questions and answers from the audience. So the way that you pose your question is in our question and answer box. So if anybody hasn't heard me say this, I'm going to just repeat that you move your mouse around. You should be able to click on the icon, the little bubble that pops up that looks like a question mark, and you can type your question right in there. And we'll try and answer as many as we can throughout the course of the program. Actually, let me move this slide over so I can advance my slides. So Cooperative Extension is the land grant arm of the university. There is a land grant institution in every single state, and University of Rhode Island is our land grant institution. And we have a number of strategic focus areas. Not only do we focus on gardening and farming with the food system and agriculture focus, but we have programs and goals in the areas of land stewardship, water resources, energy efficiency, and healthy lifestyles. And I also think it's important to say that we are dedicated to helping improve, people's quality of life and the health of the environment around Rhode Island, but we also believe in social justice, and we strive to reach diverse audiences and bring all of the good knowledge and resources of the university and the land grant system out to those who need it. That's why we're thrilled to be able to offer these online programs while people are still learning remotely and we're unable to meet in the community. So I just wanted to mention that you will be sent a brief survey in a follow-up email, and we hope that ask that you please complete that short survey so that we can know how effective our programming is in educating you and changing your behavior for the better. We also want to mention, we get this question a lot, that the session is being recorded, and you can find all of our webinar recordings with closed captioning on our URI Cooperative Extension YouTube channel. Easiest way to find that is to search URI Cooperative Extension YouTube. So we're going to start with Andy Radin, who is going to, basically the three panelists are going to answer some questions, frequently asked questions that we've gotten over the past few years through our URI Gardening and Environmental Hotline. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Vanessa Venturini. I'm the state program leader of the URI Master Gardener program through Cooperative Extension. And we're so glad to bring this program to you all today. The Master Gardener program is focused on food systems and helping people grow their own food. And this is one element. So we're going to start with Andy Radin, who is our agriculture extension agent, and he can speak from experience, not only doing a lot of crops research, but being a former farmer himself. So Andy, take it away.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hello, everybody. This little quickie talk is just going to be a basic outline of what we mean by soil amendments. And believe me, I could go on for hours and hours about this, but I'll mainly talk about amendments that enhance soil physical properties. But as I have listed here, there are three ways that we amend the soil, and one is, or reasons that is by it's for improving soil physical quality. Another is to increase soil nutrient content, and another, and this is something kind of more recent, is to selectively favor soil microbial populations. We're not going to talk about that today. There's lots to talk about that, and I hope sometime we can get more into detail about that. So here, just a quick list of materials that you can use to improve soil physical qualities. Of course, probably most people add compost. It's a great, as we say, soil conditioner. Again, conditioner refers to physical qualities. Something we call leaf mold, which is essentially partially decomposed leaves that have been raked up, hopefully usually run through a shredder, because leaves that are left intact and put in a pile to rot often don't rot, although that does depend on what kind of leaves are in there. Leaves that have more tannin in them, like oak leaves and beech leaves, break down much more slowly than, say, maple leaves or ash leaves. But really, it should all be shredded. Manure, when well decomposed and applied the previous fall and worked into the soil, is an excellent amendment for improving soil physical quality. Arborist wood chips, which are, I know where I live, the crews are going through trying to clear away things from the power lines before this year's crop of crazy storms. And so there is a ton of wood chip that if you ask some of these crews to dump at your house, a lot of times they'll do it because they're looking to get rid of it. Other yard wastes from your own yard, including grass clippings, leaves, sticks. Obviously, the sticks and the leaves, like I said, better run through a shredder if you can. And then food wastes, things that don't putrefy, things that don't have like animal fats in them, which can get pretty nasty and attract undesirable critters. You want to avoid those. And again, those are usually better put into a compost pile and decomposed well, either hot or by using worm composting. So the question is, how do these materials improve soil physical qualities? All of these things are relatively high in carbon and low in other elements that are the nutrients that your plants need, namely nitrogen. So pretty much anything with, if you're familiar with composting and carbon to nitrogen ratios, anything say above 30-1 or more is really more of a soil conditioner. At 30-1, that's considered the ideal ratio for composting. If you put that in a pile and start turning it and aerating it, it will start cooking. So materials with higher carbon and nitrogen ratios are mainly because you're adding carbon. And that carbon is the result of the photosynthetic activity of plants. So these are typically plant-based wastes. And that is what we call reduced carbon. And then that carbon then becomes oxidated when microorganisms start consuming it. Or in the case of us, when we eat reduced carbon like a saltine cracker, we oxidize it, we get energy. So the sun's energy is actually what's been trapped in those reduced carbon molecules, because again, I said that's plant wastes. Plants use the sun, they make carbohydrates. So when we add those to the soil, microorganisms unlock that energy when they consume the reduced carbon. So it is, when you add carbon to the soil, you're providing food for microorganisms in the soil. So that microbial activity produces byproducts, which cement soil minerals together into aggregates. And soil aggregates are what creates soil structure. And that provides for good drainage, aeration, and further enhanced microbial activity, because actually each of those aggregates, because it allows more aeration, which is oxygen mainly, is allowing oxygen into the soil to allow those microorganisms to thrive. And also on the interior of each one of those aggregates is where lots of microbial activity is taking place. In fact, that's where pretty much all the microbial activity is taking place. So by creating soil structure with microorganisms, you're creating little houses for all of them to live in. And this question of coffee grounds, I've listed a whole lot of stuff here. Coffee grounds are actually come in around that ideal ratio for composting. So it's perfectly fine to add it to a compost pile, but you don't want to overdo it, because if you overdo it, you will start to get pockets of pure coffee ground that can become anaerobic, because it does hold water very well. It's finely ground material. So if you're using if you're using coffee grounds in a pile, you want to mix it in thoroughly, make a homogeneous mix. It's a good way to dump an organic waste material. So that's a great thing. And it's not something that critters want to eat, like four-legged critters. So it's perfectly good that way. It's also fine to scatter it directly on the garden surface where it will break down, or you can work it into the soil. The important thing is to evenly distribute it. Don't leave big blobs of it on the soil or in the soil. You want to mix it around well. It is certainly a source of organic matter. It's carbon-based material. It is a very minor source of nitrogen. It can have 2 to 2.5% by dry weight. Okay, so if you went to the Starbucks and you got yourself a couple of 5-gallon buckets full of coffee grounds that are wet, remember that probably, I'm guessing, the moisture content is something like 75% or more. So it's actually a lot less than, in terms of the amount of actual nitrogen you're putting in the soil, than what the weight of those buckets might make you think. Also, it is an insignificant source of potassium and phosphorus, as opposed to something I read online which says, oh, it's a substantial source of potassium and phosphorus. No, it is not. Numbers that are under 1% is not considered substantial. So it's not okay to put down a thick layer of it immediately around plants. It will form a crust, and it will actually prevent water from infiltrating. And is it the greatest, most amazing, most magical soil amendment ever known? No, but it's fine to add to your soil in your garden or your compost pile. And I think that's it, right?
That's right. Thanks, Andy. The shortest presentation from Andy Radin, ladies and gentlemen, that you'll ever see. So thanks, Andy. That was wonderful. He loves soil. He can't help himself. So we're next going to speak about we're going to hear from Dr. Rebecca Brown, who is one of our faculty members here. She's a professor of plant sciences and sustainable agriculture in the Department of Plant Sciences and Entomology. She's also a researcher here, doing a lot of crops research down at the agronomy farm, and she's been a wonderful help to us in extension in terms of vetting a lot of the content of the other presentations that you've been hearing from Master Gardener volunteers. So it is my pleasure to welcome Rebecca Brown to share some frequently asked questions.
Okay, so the first question that I was given for today is what to grow, what the best options are for growing vegetables if you don't have a lot of space. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Vanessa. So I'm just going to give some hints for making the most of what space you do have. So the first thing, obviously, is if you're space limited, focus on the vegetables that you really like to eat, and particularly anything that you really like that you can't easily just buy at the local farmers markets. You know, you want to use your limited space in a way that's going to give you the most benefit. And obviously that's a question that only each individual can answer. If you're planting in a limited space, you should plant in beds with equidistant spacing between the plants rather than in rows. If you look in the seed catalog or on the seed packet, they will often say, for instance, to space the plants 6 inches apart in the row with 30 inches between the rows. Those spacings are designed to allow for equipment. And if you're doing everything by hand in a small space, you don't need to leave that much space between the rows. You could instead, for instance, put your plants 12 inches apart in all directions, or maybe even 6 inches apart in all directions. It really depends on how much space the plant actually needs. Vining plants can be trellised to grow vertically and take less space. Greens such as kale, spinach, leaf lettuce, and Swiss chard, and many of the herbs can be harvested by picking individual leaves rather than cutting the entire plant. And this will extend the harvest period from each plant, meaning that you need fewer plants and thus less space. If you want to grow broccoli and your space is limited, similarly, you can choose varieties with very strong side shoot production so that you can get multiple harvests off of each plant. And baby greens are a classic solution for very limited space because they have a very short seed to harvest cycle, only 3 to 5 weeks. And you can grow enough salad mix for a family for a week in just a very small space. And then you just do lots of small plantings and keep recycling your space. Some of the most space efficient vegetables are the ones that have extended harvest over a long period. So you get a high yield per plant. So things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, potatoes, especially if you're growing them for new potatoes, cucumbers, your zucchini, your summer squash, and we already talked about herbs and leafy greens. Also, pole beans are much more space efficient than bush beans. The next one, Vanessa. There are certain vegetables that you probably do not want to grow if you're very limited for space, unless it's something that's really important to you. So sweet corn and corn in general is a classic space hog. Because corn is wind pollinated, you need a good sized block of corn for good pollination. You can't really get good results with just a row or two. And each plant produces only 2 to 3 ears per plant. So you have a large plant that's going to take, maybe 4 or 6 square feet of space for each plant. And you're only going to get 2 or 3 ears on that plant. That said, you can grow corn in small spaces, and there are people who do because it's culturally important to them. Head vegetables also have large plants, and you generally only get 1 head per plant. So you're going to get less per plant than if you grow the loose leaf variants. And then our pumpkins, our melons, our watermelons. These are very large vining plants. The large fruit make them difficult to trellis, and they only produce a few fruit per plant, much fewer than cucumbers or summer squash. But you can use varieties with personal size fruit if you're going to trellis them. The smaller fruits are less likely to pull themselves off the vine with their own weight. Okay, on to the next question. So another question that we frequently see is people are concerned about high levels of lead in their soil test results and how to manage that. And there are actually a number of ways to deal with lead in garden soil. So first of all, you need to know what the risks are of growing vegetables in soil with high amounts of lead. And there are basically 3 ways that the lead in the soil can become a problem for humans. It's possible for the lead to be absorbed by plants. You can have surface contamination of your vegetables. And then, of course, there's the issue of contact with the contaminated soil. So we're going to look at each of these risks. So what about plants absorbing lead? There are some plants that can absorb large numbers of heavy metals. They're used in bioremediation of brownfield sites. But vegetable plants have been shown to absorb very little lead. Most of the lead in garden soil is not in a form where it can even enter the plant. And what lead the plant does absorb mostly remains in the xylem, the water conducting tissue of the roots. So when you're eating vegetables where you don't eat the roots, you have negligible amounts of lead well below the safe limit for lead in food. Okay, what about the surface? If you've got contaminated soil, contaminated dust, it could get on the surface of the plant. And in fact, this is the primary way that lead becomes associated with vegetables. And leafy greens, because they have such a large surface area, have the highest chance of surface contamination. However, ordinary washing or peeling will remove most of this surface contamination because it is just on the outside surface. And then the final question is risks of contact with the soil. And it turns out that skin absorption of lead is essentially not a problem. And there's no evidence that gardening produces lead-rich respirable particle-sized dust. In other words, you're not going to inhale the lead. So your primary route of lead uptake is from ingestion, actually eating the soil. So as long as you're careful not to eat the soil, you're careful to wash your hands after gardening, to wash your vegetables before you eat them, it's not a problem. And in fact, this lead ingestion is one reason why lead toxicity is so much more of a problem for young children, because they're far more likely to eat soil or to put their dirty hands in their mouths than adults are. I'll move on to the next one. So there are practices you can take to further decrease the already low risks. First of all, keeping your soil mulched will reduce surface contamination because you're avoiding any lead contaminated dust, and it will keep you from contacting the soil. If you have extremely high lead levels or you're particularly concerned, you can always construct raised beds with a barrier under the bed to keep the roots from penetrating into the contaminated soil, and then clean soil in the beds so that there's no way the vegetables are coming into contact with that contaminated soil. And it is a good idea to locate gardens away from painted surfaces and high traffic roads, as these are locations that are most likely to have high lead. And you want to maintain high soil fertility. So you want to make sure you add your organic matter, you maintain your soil quality, you add your fertilizers so that your plants are growing vigorously and the lead that is present in the soil can remain bound to phosphate and to organic matter and inaccessible to the vegetables. Okay, that's all I have for now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's definitely a question that comes up a lot in our gardening hotline, both of those, and good to hear some of the ways to mitigate those risks. So next we're going to hear from Heather Faubert, who is also instrumental in our agriculture extension world in helping diagnose what's wrong with crops, whether it's a farmer or a home gardener. She calls them plant owners. Heather Faubert is the director of the URI Plant Protection Clinic, which is where you can send your plant samples if you'd like them to be diagnosed by a professional. And she also helps train our master gardeners in diagnostics. So please join me in welcoming Heather Faubert.
Hi there. Well, greetings. Thanks for joining us here. So yeah, my first question, actually, all right, so what is causing the leaves of my cucumber plants to have yellowing edges and a white sheen? So, yeah, so this is set up a little different. So yeah, this is more the way that I had it set up. So, yeah, let me first talk about problems with plants wilting. So I was given 3 cucumber questions and then a squash question. So, problems with plants wilting or problems with cucumbers just not growing very well. So first, a little bit about cucumbers. Cucumbers really need warm soils above 55 degrees. If you try starting your cucumber seeds outside too early in the season, you're going to fail because they really need the warm soils. They also need a lot of water, 1 to 2 inches of water per week. And I think a lot of problems maybe with our cucumber plants not looking very good is that they've been getting uneven water. They really need a good water supply throughout the life of the plant. Also, harvesting frequently. You want to make sure that you're removing those cucumbers before they become too mature. You know, if you miss a cucumber here and there and it gets really big and very mature, the plant sees that as, okay, I've done my job and I'm going to shut down now. So they will stop producing more flowers and more fruit. So you really need to be diligent about getting out there and harvesting your cucumbers. It takes about 50 to 70 days for a cucumber to mature. So when you can start harvesting fruit off the cucumber plant, you know, that's yeah, so that's the days of maturity. It's written right there on the packet seed, and it depends on the variety of the cucumber you're planting. But so this gives you, what's a good idea to do is after your first planting of cucumbers, maybe about 3 weeks later, plant some more seeds of cucumbers. Don't just depend on that first planting of cucumbers to last you through the season, because the plants probably are going to kind of choke out before the end of the season, before you're done eating cucumbers or making pickles. So it's really a good idea to, like, about 3 weeks later, plant some more cucumbers so you have a more extended season of harvest. Okay. So then about the wilting of cucumbers. So there's a disease called cucumber wilt, or called bacterial wilt. And this is a bacterial disease. You know, our plant diseases are primarily fungi, but then sometimes bacteria can be a problem as well. And so bacterial wilt is caused by a bacterium. And this disease is transmitted by the striped cucumber beetle. So next picture. So yeah, here are pictures of the striped cucumber beetle. Rather cute little beetles, but they can do quite a bit of damage. They overwinter outside of the fields in the debris, the leaves or whatever debris that's around the field, and they overwinter there, and they come into and start feeding on the new plants early in the season. And overwinter, they have stored the bacterium inside their body. So these beetles can go and transmit that bacterial wilt disease. And so you need to control the beetles to be able to control bacterial wilt. Now these beetles, as you can see, they also do a lot of feeding damage. And so even if they weren't transmitting the wilt, you would just want to get them out of there. Yeah, this is a little test you can do. If you see a plant that just wilts, you can kind of cut it on a humid day and stretch it apart like that. And if you see that snotty-like connection there between the two bits of the stem or the stalk, then it's a pretty good idea that it's bacterial wilt disease. Okay. So this is what I was saying before, that if you're seeing these, these are kind of nondescript, kind of yellowing edges or a white silvery leaf sheen. I wasn't sure exactly what this question was talking about, but I see some cucumber plants that just look kind of old and tired. And so that's when I was saying you really want to make sure that they're watered enough, and you want to make sure that you don't skip any, miss any fruit when you're harvesting. You should be out there every day with your plants, harvesting and looking for pests. Okay. So, but another reason that perhaps that you might be seeing a white sheen on your plants is there's some diseases, some fungal diseases that do attack cucumber plants. Powdery mildew, you might be able to see that powdery sheen on the left side. On the right side, you can see more of a close-up. It's really on the surface of the leaf, but it really can do a lot of damage to the cucumbers. So what you want to do is you want to be selecting varieties that are resistant to powdery mildew and to downy mildew. Now, when a plant is resistant, that does not mean it's immune, but it's just, it's more tolerant of the disease. It's less likely to get shut down by the disease. So, okay. Next picture. Okay, so, oh, my summer squash will not fruit. What could be the issue? I was just told that the question was, what are the issues with summer squash? So I'm going to kind of go with what I was planning for. So the issues with summer squash could also be powdery mildew, or it could be squash bugs, or maybe the issues are, what do I do with too many zucchinis? And I suggest you make zucchini boats because they're delicious. But let's go to the next slide. And so for summer squash, gets the powdery mildew, very similar to on the cucumbers. You get this powdery fungal growth that's on the surface of the leaves. And powdery mildew really thrives in humid, warm conditions. Wow, just like we're getting today in Rhode Island. So what you want to do is, as best you can, reduce the humidity. And so the way you're going to do that is to make sure you take care of weeds and also leave enough room between the plants so that you get good air circulation. Okay. And then also there's lots of resistant varieties that you can get for your zucchini or your summer squash. So this is a list that I got from Cornell, from their vegetable online website, and they just list a lot of different varieties and what they're resistant to. So that's a helpful thing to be able to pick out a variety that is pretty resistant to powdery mildew. Okay. So another problem I see on squash bugs is squash bugs. Another thing I see on zucchinis or summer squash are squash bugs. And it is a true bug. You can see on the right side, there's that little dark insect. It's a true bug, and it's got a proboscis that feeds on the fruit. And so you can see those are scars on that zucchini. So next one, please. So the squash bugs, they lay these eggs, or that orangey color, or like a rusty or even a brown color. They're hard. They're almost like little BBs. They're not really squishy like some other insect eggs are. And they're usually deposited on the underside of the leaves, sometimes in the top sides of the leaves. But the beauty of you being a home gardener is you can look at your plants, and you should, as I said, you should be out with your vegetable plants every single day and looking them over for insect pests or disease problems, and certainly to remove any weeds. It's not like you've got a whole acre's worth of vegetables you're probably tending. So you really should be out there scouting every day, because the eggs of the squash bugs, they could either be squished, or what I like to do is just sort of rip the leaf away and remove them. If you don't get the eggs, these eggs will hatch, and those are the rather cute little nymphs of the squash bugs that will then have just emerged from these eggs, and then they're going to spread out and start causing damage to the plant. So it's really best to get them at the egg stage. And I couldn't help but to try and put in a plug for the Rhode Island Farm Scavenger Hunt. So sorry about that, but I don't have many avenues to publicize the scavenger hunt this year, and we're not sure how it's going to go, but this is the 10th year of the Rhode Island Farm Scavenger Hunt, and you can look online at the fruit growers website, and you can download the brochure there, or it's much better to have your own brochure. Oh, looky here. I just happen to have one close by. So you can download the brochure, and you can see what farms are participating. And the farms that are open now, they have brochures at the farm, so you can go and pick one up. But it's a fun thing to do with the family or by yourself. And there's 32 participating farms, and it's just to help you see Rhode Island from a farm point of view. Okay, that's it.
I love that. And it's all about supporting local agriculture and our local farmers. And we all know how important that is, more now than ever that we've, come through the pandemic. So I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen, and we can ask a few questions of everybody. So my first question is for Andy. How about using coffee grounds to get rid of slugs? Is that effective?
Yeah, I saw that question. I've never tested that in some, controlled experiment kind of way, but I'm going to say no. You can certainly use something like diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is a very fine ground silica deposit from ancient microorganisms, and it is abrasive. And soft-bodied insects like slugs crawl over it, it will cut into their very delicate skin and it can cause damage to them. Coffee grounds really, on a relative scale, are not abrasive at all. So, and like I said, a thick film of that over the surface of your soil is not a good thing to have.
Good. So coffee grounds in the compost pile, not really for slug control. Good. Another question we had was about what type of string you use for your vertical tomato garden. I might just encourage that person to go check out our Cooperative Extension YouTube page, where there's a great video of you using that vertical garden technique. If you want to add anything else, feel free. We had another question though, Andy, related to does that mean treated animal manure is better or faster for plant growth since it's already pre-digested and most likely microorganisms already exited and carried over from animals? Remember, we're talking about home gardening here with manure.
So, you know, if you were to use like really fresh, raw manure, that would be fresh, raw manure. It has a lot of available nutrients immediately. But we do discourage the use of fresh raw manure in your garden where you are planting vegetables immediately afterwards. Like I said in the presentation, if you're going to use fresh manure, you should be applying it the previous fall and it should be worked into the soil. And that way, any of the pathogenic organisms that might be in it will be long gone after having gone through microbial digestion in the soil.
Thanks, Andy. So moving on from soil to some plant pathology question. This one's for you, Heather. How can I prevent little green worms or maybe their caterpillars on or in her kale? This is a question from Helen. She prefers not to spray anything on them.
Well, you certainly can go hand pick caterpillars off, but before that even happens, well, there'll be eggs on the underside, so you can go looking for those. It's little green worms are probably either imported cabbage worms or what are the other ones? Cross-striped worms. So anyway, you can go looking for them, but then you could also cover up the plants with a row cover. So you would want to make sure that there aren't any caterpillars under there before you'd cover them up. But you can use products such as Remay, and especially something for like kale where you don't need bees in there to do any pollinating. You can cover up the plants and protect them so that the butterflies can't get in there and lay eggs. Andy or Rebecca, did you want to make a comment about that? Or that's fine.
Yeah, I was just going to say row cover. You know, that's really your best solution. And then if you're not doing row cover, scouting and picking the worms off.
Awesome.
I'll add in one more thing that is, I'm not sure what it is your husband is spraying, but maybe you should find out. There are materials such as Bacillus thuringiensis, something like Dipel or Thuricide, those products. Those are commonly used in organic farming and gardening. They're very next to nothing in terms of toxicity to anything else at all, except for caterpillars. So, you know, it works really well. You can get a little spray bottle of it pre-mixed. So just throw that in there.
Okay, what if my zucchini or cucumbers already have powdery mildew? How can I get rid of it? I'll start with Heather.
Okay, so for most diseases, if you're going to be spraying fungicides, you want to spray it before you start seeing disease. And actually for powdery mildew, it's really the one disease where you can wait until you start seeing it before you start spraying. So as soon as you start seeing powdery mildew, you can spray with, there's some nice organic chemicals like called Caligreen, and it's a, it's like hydrogen peroxide. Which kind of peroxide is it? What is it called, Andy? What's the active ingredient in like the potassium bicarbonate. That's what it is. Yeah, that's right. It is. Sorry. So yeah, potassium bicarbonate is a good thing to spray on to keep powdery mildew away. Also, some insecticidal soap can also work for powdery mildew, or some that superfine oil also can be very helpful against powdery mildew. Andy might have
I
some
wanted to
things as
throw
well.
in there also, please note, potassium bicarbonate is not sodium bicarbonate,
Right.
which is, you know, baking soda. Don't use baking soda.
Okay, a couple of questions for Rebecca. What are some indicators that I've watered my vegetable garden properly?
Yeah, that's a bit of a tough one. But basically, when you want to water for probably a couple of hours at a time. And depending on whether we've had rain, you know, if there hasn't been any rain, you want to water at least once a week. You know, you can tell whether the plants need water by sticking your finger in the soil and seeing if it's moist within the row. But the most common mistake I see people make is watering too frequently and too shallowly. You really want to water with a drip irrigation system or a sprinkler system. And if you're watering by hand, you want to build some sort of, you know, mounds, dish and mound system around your plants to hold the water in so it doesn't just run right away as you apply it, because it needs to soak deeply into the soil.
Thank you. Good point. Another question for you, Rebecca. Back to this idea of if you have limited space, limited sun. Linda says, I only have space for my raised beds on the north side of my house. The sun sneaks by during the summer, but by late summer they get shade. Anything I can grow there for a late crop, or is my season over?
Well, so vegetables generally do need sun, but leafy greens tend to be more tolerant of shade than just about anything else. So that's what I would suggest focusing on, is things like lettuce and spinach and kale, stuff like that. They're not going to do as well as they would in full sun, but they will tolerate the shade better than, say, tomatoes.
Great. Okay, this is a question for Andy and Rebecca. What are the easiest plants to grow in New England for beginners?
I would say tomatoes are one of the easiest, simply because they're so widely grown, and they do so well in containers.
I would throw in radishes, short season leafy greens like some of the, there are brassicas, some of the Asian mustard related greens like baby bok choy. Also lettuce from seed for cutting, not growing out for full heads, but just you direct seed lettuce, and then in 5 weeks you can start clipping it with the scissors and make little salads every day.
Basil is also easy to grow if you get downy mildew resistant varieties. And you can buy those as transplants now. They've got, some of the varieties are out there.
I think herbs are a great option, especially if you don't have a lot of sun. So, you know, hopefully you use your herbs. You can put those in a great spot as well. You don't need 6 hours of sun like some of the fruiting vegetables do. Okay, another question, Andy, more specific here. How do you deal with seeds in the leaf mold? I've avoided it ever since experiencing a huge maple seedling issue.
I think I need to read that directly. Is that in the questions listed?
Yeah, so he has a leaf mold, but he's getting little maple seedlings coming up in it.
Oh, leaf mold. Okay,
Leaf mold.
Like, yeah. Leaf
Meaning
mold is a really common disease of tunnel tomatoes. That's why I'm leaf mold. Okay.
Maybe you can explain what leaf mold is to the group.
Okay. Leaf mold as in the material, or leaf mold as in the disease?
As in the soil amendment.
Okay, so leaf mold is basically shredded leaves, you know, raked up from your house, but the shredding is really important, and typically they've been sitting in a pile for a year or two, and they've started to have a lot of fungal growth working its way through the pile. So it's really decomposed somewhat, as opposed to leaves that are just still very much intact even if they're shredded. So it really needs some aging. And yes, I have certainly seen, especially those darn Norway maple seedlings, they just come up everywhere. I would say the best thing you could do for that, I don't know if this is after spreading or before, but what you could do is turn your pile of leaves that you're making leaf mold with over time. And again, it should sit for at least a year. If you flip that around enough times, you'll prevent any of those seedlings from really getting going. If they're germinating after you've already applied them to your garden, I have no solutions other than get in there and yank them or try to go in with a hoe and just disrupt them.
Thank you. Awesome. So Sue asked this question. Maybe this is good to start with Heather, a tomato question. My newly planted tomatoes quickly got brown or white spots that give a lacy appearance on the leaves. Some of the leaves are wilting now. What would cause this? I have planted tomatoes for years, not sure what to do. Thank you.
I don't know what this is. You can send us, I'll say something and then Andy, I'll ask for her. Maybe you have an idea. I would suggest you send us a picture, and you can send a picture to the garden hotline, or you can send pictures directly to us. But I guess it's best to go first through the garden hotline, and then if they can't answer it, then they would send it to us, because I don't really know what's going on here. Tomatoes are funny. Yes, they're pretty easy to grow, but they get lots of diseases, and they also, if there's something strange in the compost, they might grow weirdly. So they're very sensitive plants, and they get affected by lots of different things. Andy or Rebecca, do you know what this might be describing?
I would just add that it's maybe possible, but you have to, only if you see the culprit. Flea beetles potato flea beetles do attack tomatoes sometimes. Sometimes they don't. In fact, somebody just brought me some eggplant seedlings from their little greenhouse at home that are covered with flea beetle damage, and the tomatoes growing in cell packs right next to them have no damage at all. However, flea beetles can definitely attack tomato plants. So if you see little jumping tiny black beetles, maybe that could be a problem.
Great. And
I don't know what it is. I'd have to see the plants.
so yeah, we can go through our diagnostic process by starting by sending a few photos, include something for scale, like a pencil or something in the photo, to the gardening hotline, and that email is gardener@uri.edu. Here's a kiwi. Anybody know about kiwi plants? Why doesn't my kiwi plant flower? It's about 10 years old, male and female, about 70 feet from each other.
Yeah, I hear they take like 7 years or something to bear fruit. Are you over fertilizing? I would suggest maybe not fertilizing them at all, because a lot of times fruiting trees, they won't produce fruit if they're getting excessive amount of fertilizer. Other than that, I really don't know very much about these hardy kiwis. I do know that Narrow Lane Farm in North Kingstown grows them. You can buy some fruit from them when they're ready, and maybe talk to them and get some suggestions of what to do, because I do not know much at all about hardy kiwi.
Cool. Here's another question. I've noticed my bok choy and leafy lettuces want to bolt early. Anything to do to avoid this? Oh, I think Andy just answered it. But Andy, do you want to?
Sure, I can speak. Typically, bolting in those is brought on by some kind of stress, and one stress could be under fertilization. Unless if you were to tell me no, the plants are nice and deep green, then I would eliminate that as a possibility. It could be in a very droughty, dry spot, and so cloudy conditions will bring on early bolting. Another possibility is that if you transplanted those into your garden from starts, sometimes transplanting with if you cause root damage when you're transplanting, and this is especially true with bok choy, it will bolt pretty quickly.
Great. Another tomato question that I missed earlier. Purpling of tomatoes. So let me find the question. Did you see that one? Is it normal for purpling of tomato leaves to occur? And the person was asking if it's related to like planting it too early when it's too cold out.
Yeah, that's extremely common. Potatoes or tomatoes get chilled and they can't take up enough phosphorus, and so the leaves will turn purple. And usually the best solution is to just wait for it to warm up, and next year don't plant your tomatoes out quite as early.
Any suggestion for an organic spray to use for eliminating striped cucumber beetles?
Well, there's an organic spray called Pyganic, and that will kill striped cucumber beetles. It doesn't last very long. It probably will just kill them that day, and then they could come back. So what's a good thing to do? You could use that row cover again. If you see you've got striped cucumber beetles, you could spray with the Pyganic and then use a row cover, cover them up and let them grow for a while so that the cucumber beetles go to your neighbors and leave you alone.
I'll just mention though, I honestly don't know if you can buy Pyganic in a sort of a homeowner-sized container. I've never seen it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The active ingredient of Pyganic is actually what's called pyrethrum. And pyrethrum is an extract from a chrysanthemum plant root. And that's how the stuff is made. As far as generics of pyrethrum or some other brand, I don't know, maybe Ortho makes a pyrethrum. I don't know. But pyrethrum, and that's ending with UM, that's the active ingredient you're looking for.
Good point.
Thank you. Yeah. So Nancy asks, this is my first year with an elevated raised bed. Can you suggest the best veggies to plant? Maybe I'll give this to Rebecca to start, please.
So elevated raised beds. Probably, I mean, I'm assuming by elevated raised bed, it's something that's not in contact. The bed itself is not in contact with the ground. It's up on legs. In which case I would suggest probably sticking with shorter things that maybe don't require quite as much water. Tomatoes could get too big for a bed like that. But in general, I mean, most things should be able to grow in there.
How about, do marigolds really help to keep insects off of my plants, or is this an old wives' tale? Who wants to take this one?
Oh, I don't think they're going to keep them off of your plants, but when you have flowers around your vegetables, they're providing nectar for good beneficial insects like parasitic wasps. So they can be beneficial that way. That the marigolds themselves actually are going to repel things, I don't think so. Andy or Rebecca, do you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. Marigolds tilled into the soil as a green manure have been shown to reduce nematodes, but those aren't a huge problem around here anyway. And in terms of actual above ground visible insects, yeah, I don't think they're going to make a difference.
And I think, you know, the next piece, attracting beneficial insects that will then be predators, natural predators for your pests. So they'll get rid of your pests naturally. So that's why you want to have the nectar flowers incorporated near your vegetable garden. It's always a good thing.
I know like sweet alyssum is one that is very well known to be helpful to a lot of parasitic insects.
Trying to find more questions we haven't answered yet.
I just answered one.
How about you
expound
upon it out loud for us?
That was my tomato seedling came out as clusters. What should I do? Can I leave it as is, or is it not good? And I I wrote in capital letters, thin them. I'm not sure what exactly you mean by clusters, but I'm assuming it means something like they're growing in cell packs of some sort or cells, and you have multiple plants per cell. You should have one and only one plant in a cell.
And then have them planted in your garden, like how many inches apart?
Yeah, well,
Depends on the variety.
depends on the variety, what the growth form of this particular tomato is, whether it's determinate or indeterminate, and what your intentions are for staking and pruning and trellising. But certainly, I'm gonna say at least 18 inches in both directions. Tomato plants get wild and woolly, especially if your soil is in good condition and well fertilized.
How about planting cucumbers and tomatoes together in the same bed? I've heard rumors they don't do well together. Is that true?
I think they'd be fine together.
They're fine together. I plant them together in the same bed in the teaching high tunnel all the time. I mean, you've got to make sure you have enough space because everybody gets big, but they're fine together.
Yeah, the good thing about vining fruit or vegetables, if you're growing those in like your raised bed, you can let them vine right out onto the lawn. So if you wanted to have growing winter squash or watermelon or something like that, you don't need to have them confined right to the bed. They can eep over. Same with cucumbers.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for answering all these questions, and thanks for everybody for participating. I'm going to just ask if anybody has any last advice for a beginning vegetable gardener, and then I'll share my screen again and kind of wrap up that way.
I want to just say good for you for planting a garden and spend a lot of time with your plants. And if you've got questions, you see an insect, you see eggs, whatever, take a good photo and send it to the gardening hotline and get it figured out what it is. Because yeah, identification is really the key to learning about things in your garden. Okay.
I would throw in, don't pack together fruiting vegetables too tightly. They need space. And if it means that in your garden is very small and you can only fit 3 or 4 tomato plants, 3 or 4 tomato plants can produce an incredible amount of fruit. Also, one other thing I'd throw in, make sure to fertilize your garden appropriately. I think people tend to under-fertilize rather than over-fertilize, and the results can often be a little thin or weak.
Anything, Rebecca, before we?
Well, I was just going to say, don't forget weed control. Mulching or weeding, you know, vegetables really don't compete very well with weeds.
Wonderful. Well, I learned so much today myself, and Andy, my tomatoes need to be spaced apart. I got it. I just wanted to fill in everybody that our application process, if you're interested in becoming a master gardener, please check out our website. This is for folks who are interested in continuing to learn about being a better vegetable or gardener in general, and then sharing that information with the community to help improve everybody's livelihoods and their success. Quality of life and their success in the garden as well. So if you're interested in helping others and being a part of your community, we welcome you to take that online application. It's due on November 1st, and we hold the training in the spring semester. So you'll learn more from everybody who is in today's panel, as well as different instructors, faculty, and staff throughout the 14-week course. I also want to direct everyone to our online gardening resources on the Master Gardener page. We have a Rhode Island planting calendar, which is a great place to see when to start things by seed versus transplant or indoors early in the season. Here's that information on our URI gardening hotline. Typically, we have a phone, but this year we're email only. So if you have any questions, take a photo, send your question to gardner@uri.edu and we'll help you out. We invite you to join us at our next webinar. We hold them every Tuesday at 7 and Friday at noon. And again, please complete our survey. We thank you all very much for being here with us today and have a wonderful growing season. And thank you.